o'clock. So we have our next talk coming up. This is Ben, who I actually met just through LinkedIn connection. Someone said, hey, you're doing this offensive thing and you're going to Scythe. And I know this person in Jacksonville that that's doing some pretty cool stuff that you should meet. And we just met. We talked for a bit, saw what they were doing. And they ended up becoming a partner of Scythe. They use Scythe for their clients in a consulting capacity and built some pretty cool things, something called Blindspots. So I'd like to welcome Ben to Unicon. And look at that, we're matching shirts. That's awesome.
Yeah.
See, all our partners get swag. So there you go.
I get by far the best compliments on this thing for sure.
That's awesome. Well, we'll give you control here and allow you to go through your slides. And
does the voice sound okay?
You sound great.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to launch into it then. Good afternoon for some of you. Good morning for the rest. Really excited to be here today. I'm going to see if I can share my screen with the rest of you. Beautiful. So my name is Ben Finke. I'm the co-founder of a company called OnDefend. I do a lot of security consulting. Also the organizer of B-Sides Jacksonville here in Northeast Florida. And what I wanted to talk with the gang today about was our adventures getting into the purple team flow, right? And really, we just kind of caught on to the idea of using the purple team name as a way to really answer this question, which is how do we most effectively help our customers improve what they're doing on defense? So, before the idea of purple team came along, the only mechanism we really had to help companies test as third-party consultants were pen tests and like red team engagements. And those are obviously still super valuable, but there's some limitations that we run into that I think are frustrating for us and frustrating for our customers. And so our idea was, take the things that are limitations from pen tests, which mostly come down to the limited amount of time that you have, and just the difficulty of being able to really take the timeline of the events that your team does when you're red teaming, and then give it back to the blue team in a way that they can turn it into better detections and figure out if what they've done now would be better. So we had this idea of in a regular red team engagement, you've got to basically pick the limited selection of attack paths that you think will get you to the objective, which of course leaves a lot of untested ground in the customer environment. So we want to be able to flip a lot of that around. So obviously before purple team, we'd frequently go in and you'd waltz right by the customer security team. And when we would sit down with them afterwards to figure out why that had occurred, we ran into a few different, root causes. The first one, the most primary, is what you would expect, their tools just weren't configured correctly, right? Either they were just straight out of the box, nobody had bothered to tune them for their environment, or they had been tuned 2 years ago, and then that person left and nobody stepped back in to take over. Something else we saw a lot though that was really interesting was changes sort of in the environment around those tools. So one of my better examples of this is a customer of ours had invested a lot of money in some device that was supposed to detect lateral movement within subnets and things. And so we set up an engagement with them where we were going to do all this different lateral movement, do all these different ways of being able to execute commands on remote systems and give them a chance to see how their tool was working. And as we were running through it in this workshop, they were getting no alerts, no logs, no data. And it turned out that 2 months earlier, somebody in the networking team had disabled the span port that some of these devices were using to collect their data. And as you can imagine, that works less well when you're not actually getting data. So that was some of it. The other things that we saw a lot is at the point of enforcement, maybe on the endpoint, the tool would work the way you would expect it to. It might block certain things, or it might generate the right telemetry that would allow you to detect something. But it would either not be centralized in a way that the team saw that data coming in, or it came in a flood of other alerts that were just too hard for them to figure out what to go triage right in the day, because hundreds of events were coming in that they were supposed to be looking at. And occasionally we still see this where there's a delay in processing the alerts. So we may have a customer that's done a great job of tuning the tool at the point of enforcement. They've done a great job of making sure they're collecting that data. but then there's something that's preventing it from happening as close to the event as they want. So two common examples, we had one customer that had deployed a big brand named EDR tool, and we'd spent a lot of time building really in-depth, like tuned alerts for them. And we would generate the activity as a workshop, and 6 hours later, they would get the alerts. And it turned out that their console deployment was undersized for their environment, and they had roughly a 40 gigabyte backlog at any given time of telemetry that was coming into their environment. And so it took 6 hours to basically run through to find that telemetry. And as soon as it came through, it alerted right away. But 6 hours dwell time was not what the team had in mind when they set that stuff up. And finally, from a team perspective, right? We've been talking about this technology. If you think about the pen test model, most organizations are fortunate to do it maybe once a year, but they're of course going up either in the best case against consultant red teams who do this every day, or in the worst case, actual attackers who also do this every day. And it's just not fair. We need to come up with a better way for these folks to practice when you know for sure there's this activity happening in the environment, and you can go figure out what it is. So when we set about doing this purple team thing, we came up with some challenges that led us to build the Blindspot tool I'm going to show you here in a few minutes. The first challenge we ran into was just being able to generate the activity in the environment. And that was something we rely on Scythe a lot to do. We really like the ability of the team. When we show up with a customer, we don't want to spend half of the engagement just generating the activity and then only have the rest of the time to go work on finding it. We want to get to the detection engineering as quickly as possible. So really, really excited about being partners with Scythe for that. Something else that was really important for us was the ability to record all of the actions we did as part of the emulation with the customer. And really, this was mostly around not just what we ran, but how the customer handled it, and then kind of being able to let them take and slice and dice that data across different dimensions to pull some of the meaning out of it. We also wanted to be able to visualize the outputs of this thing in a way that we could find that customers could look at and understand, and sort of like an infographic style. Something else that was a challenge, maybe more for our customers than for us, was the idea of payload delivery. We had a thing, we had a problem where if we would generate some Scythe payloads, for example, trying to get unsigned exes across a network on some of the cases wasn't that easy, and it was hard to know which was where and when we were kicking it off. And so we wanted to simplify that. We really wanted to address the what now question. So, if we run an awesome simulation, like I think George mentioned the Maze ransomware simulation as part of the community, emulations is a really great one. If you run that, the customer will look at how they do and they're like, okay, so now what? So we really wanted to help address that. And finally, we wanted the customers who use this service to not necessarily require the red team half all the time. I don't mean to say that we can automate a red team member. That would be ridiculous. But what I do mean is if you have somebody at a customer site who has taken it upon themselves and they said, like, I want to be able to go run a bunch of these scenarios again so that I can figure out if these changes I think will work better, either in like a Windows event forwarding subscription or something. I want to run this again, see how I do, make some changes, run it again. We wanted to make that possible for them. For us, when we think about purple team exercises, the other thing we wanted to support was these different scenarios. So we really end up sort of purple teaming in a bunch of ways. The first one, and maybe the one that I didn't think would end up that way right away, was tabletop exercises. So by that, I mean like tabletop exercises where you have the executive team involved and you're walking through their emergency response process for like a ransomware outbreak or something, right? And invariably, we would get to the point of the conversation where the checklist or the scenario says, the service desk is getting calls from people who are talking about things that sound a lot like ransomware. So it would be the time for the incident response team lead to step up, and they would always say something like, oh yes, at this point, we would identify the command and control channels. We would isolate all of those machines from the network and have stopped the spread of the ransomware. And we'd have to be like, okay, well, we know that that's kind of the idea here, but let's really get into this. And it occurred to us that rather than look like jerks and just have to like basically tell them we didn't believe that they could actually do that, we would just say something like, that's fantastic. So our security project manager, who's our sponsor for this project, has kicked off some emulated activity. Here's the command and control channel. Let's go do that. And as you can imagine, they don't always do that very well. But it's really interesting because that's a lot of times the first opportunity the executive team has to see sort of the uncertain science of threat hunting. Well, you don't really know what the extent of the thing is. They don't really understand the delays, like the kind of the weirdness of the updates, what that looks like. And so that makes those exercises feel a lot more realistic. And it also highlights frequently the needs that the security team has, that even though they've been asking for budget that's been turned down, they want to pretend like they have everything together. They don't, and this could be a great way for them to prove that they need something else. SOC workshops, I think, are the most common purple team kind of environment where you are sitting down with the team who's responsible for detection in that environment, and you're going to run through that workshop, and it's a combination of how well did the tools work and how well does the team know how to use the tools. Those are a lot of fun. I mentioned sensor tuning earlier. One of the great things that we like with the Scythe platform is our ability to take a payload or an emulation that we really like the Maze ransomware, and then go through and within the different techniques, there's 1,000 ways to run each command, different ways to use, and maybe instead of just a command line tool, we can do the PowerShell equivalent, or we can make a compiled program that essentially exercises those APIs. But we can basically follow the same path with lots of different ways to exercise those techniques. And so that we give our customers access to those so that they can run multiple simulations of the same technique and make sure that we're not building brittle detections that would only detect, for example, like Kerberoasting if you use the invoke Kerberoast commandlet, right? We want to know there's a lot of ways to Kerberoast, and we want you to have a good, if we're thinking we have a way to detect it, we at least want to know it works for these methods, but not for these, or actually we can't find a way it doesn't work, which would be kind of amazing. We have a few customers who use it for sort of like change acceptance and like proving a new solution. So they'll have like a lab version of a machine that is like the standard image, and they'll push changes to that. They'll run our emulations or some of our Scythe payloads, use our tool to do the scoring and make sure that they're within the boundaries of acceptable and push it out. Or use it as a way to prove that this new thing with PowerShell logging and Windows Event Forwarding and Sysmon is way better. And that'll be a way that they can statistically prove it, right? And then finally, we have some customers looking to find some of those telemetry and alerting delays. But I don't want to spend all the time in slides. I'd like to get over and show you a little bit of the way the tool works now. So I'm happy to answer questions as we go. But if you just give me a couple of minutes, I'll kind of walk through how this typical user interaction with this thing goes. So this is Blindspot. It's a hosted tool that we provide. It's got two components. It's got this command and control sort of channel that you're looking at here. And there's also an agent that you download that does some of that payload delivery I mentioned a minute ago. So all of the agents are built custom for each customer. And we actually have the ability to create new agents as you're doing this. The primary reason is frequently we have customers who want to specify specific proxy settings where they'll have protected networks where there is no direct internet access, and they want to be able to do testing, but we need to have it kind of been through a proxy of some sort. So we have that set up. This actually calls an API on a whole different system where we generate the agent securely and pull it down for them so that we don't get into trouble. These are signed binaries, and we don't want that code signing cert anywhere near the internet because the animals will go find it. Once you download that agent, it phones home and checks in with us. The agent actually runs in memory, so you just run it. Like there's no installation, and it doesn't put anything on disk. It just sits there. There is a persistent mode of the agent if you want to run it as a service. When it checks in, it gives us some basic data about the system it's on, a screenshot. The screenshot we found was really cool because it gave a lot of our customers sort of like situational awareness of like, which computer is this thing on again? And so it was really helpful to have that in here. Once the agent's checking in and you're seeing the running tag on this, then you're good to go with some of our emulations. So we provide a number of different simulations in here that customers can run. One of the things we really wanted to do was to walk them through, I'll use this Maze ransomware that we've been referencing as an example. So we publish sort of like IOCs for all of our payloads, like right in the tool. So this screen is what we would put up on the projector, like for a SOC workshop or something, right? You have access to the different hash files for this one file that we're going to drop to disk. We talk about what is the command and control channel that it'll be using. And then we talk kind of generically about some of the techniques based on their MITRE ATT&CK mapping that'll be in here. We don't talk specifically about these because we want to have this up and not kind of give away the game ahead of time, right? But we have these, so these are where we'll get the IOCs to hand the team and say, let's go find and see what you can do. If you decide you want to kick a campaign off from here, it's really easy to do. You just give it some kind of a name. The Maze ransomware payload is already selected. You pick the agent you want to run on, and you submit it, and that's it. And then the next time the agent checks in, it'll go grab that. Our blind spot agent, when it sees that a payload is there to run it, it'll pull it down, do all kind of verification to make sure it's only running things we intend for it to run, and then it will it'll kick it off and it'll watch it run, and it monitors the progress of the emulation so that we can keep track of it. As soon as the emulation activity is done, we see that that's done. The agent notifies us, and we immediately go to the Scythe C2 instance or wherever we're getting the emulation from, and then we pull that down into reports. So when I was talking earlier about like the visualizations, what was really important for us was the ability to visualize with the customers how like their environment handled the different emulations. So we take every step of the activity and we give it a score based on the defender's activity. And from our perspective, there's really 4 outcomes, and maybe folks will disagree with me, but there's the idea of something being blocked where it didn't work from the attacker's perspective, right? Now, we can tell that from the way that the C2 reports the result of the emulation. We don't know why, but we know it didn't work. Then there's alerts, logged, and the no evidence category. Alerts and logged are probably pretty evident. That means it worked from the attacker perspective, but you caught the telemetry, and some of it you generated alerts on. And when we say alerts, we mean like alerts that would have gotten somebody paged at night or come back from lunch early or something. We also have the no evidence category, which may or may not be bad. It's red, so a lot of people think it's bad, but it just means like when we go to recreate this timeline, we don't see that activity in our timeline. So we generate this activity in two versions. This S-curve graph we like because it fits better on PowerPoint decks and Word documents. It is scrollable, so you can actually like tighten this timeline, and everything is based on the absolute time that the activity occurred. So as you scroll in and out, you can kind of focus in on when things happened, and then you can zoom it back out. We generate the same activity in this inverted bar graph. We find that this is more helpful for like the SOC or the detection engineering teams because it includes like the snippet of what this command was or what this action was, so they can have like put this in their notebook. This thing is exportable too, so you can drop it as like an SVG vector or a PNG, and you can add it to your notebooks, right? So we find that's really valuable. Another thing that we wanted to be able to give organizations the ability to do was set sort of like thresholds for success. So you'll notice some of these buttons have like a little crosshair on them. So one of the opening commands of this particular attack is the who am I command, right? Which is great situational awareness command for the attacker, but it has kind of maybe limited usability for a defender. Like, I don't know how many times if you built an alert or tried to log the telemetry of everybody running who am I, you'd find a lot of value out of that. So if the customers decide, you know what, I'm never going to log who am I. I'm just going to assume that any adversary I'm tracking probably has run this and definitely has this information. So you'll see here, if you met or exceeded your threshold, we give you a little check. You can see some of it is logged, some of it is alerted and blocked. What we like to do in all of these is give you, the timeline, the time of when the action occurred, the process ID that did it, the example command, and then the response. Sometimes when we're working with customers, they'll say that the reason this probably didn't get logged is it probably didn't work. So I don't think it worked, so it didn't happen. And so we can point right here like, no, it definitely worked. As we go through, the other thing that we give the customers the ability to do with this is, let's say we're starting to log these events. We want to know, how did we log these events? So you might have like Windows Defender as your AV. You might have PowerShell logging enabled. You might have Windows Event Forwarding System. Whatever the thing is, let's say that we're thinking that this is a PowerShell event. So let's say that our PS logging is how we basically got this bit of telemetry. As we go, you can assign different tools that are part of your security stack, or at least your incident response security stack, to this. And that lets us do some kind of cool things. So for this one, I have just kind of a mocked up bit of data. But when we enter your security stack, one of the things we're really interested in is where does the raw telemetry for that security stack go? Because we want to know like what's going to happen when we generate events that security tool actually picks up on. So in this case, this is some sample data from another customer where we've taken all these different actions across multiple campaigns, right? Multiple different emulations. And in this graph, we've mapped them to where they sit in their tactic and the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Then we map that activity to whatever tool they told us was responsible for doing the work. You can see a big old ugly no evidence bar here in the middle. But then, so we have Symantec and Carbon Black as they had both of those endpoint tools. What was interesting is both of those tools are set up to actually send their telemetry to their own system console, but then they're set up to forward alerts to the SIM, which in their case was Splunk. So the alert that Splunk got was like a synthesized alert from the consoles of Carbon Black and Symantec, or from the SEP agents. So if you were a engineer at this company and you got an ES Notable event out of Splunk, and you looked at it and it was like a Carbon Black alert, the very first thing you have to do is open up a new tab and log into the Carbon Black response console and then track it down. So we keep track of where does this data, the raw telemetry, actually go, and then what is the outcome from there. So this customer, this was their state in 2020 of November when we started working with them. And by February 2021, after a lot of hard work by that team, you can see the amount of the no evidence category went way down, and the data, the telemetry coming out of Carbon Black and Symantec, they're actually sending into their SIM, like the raw telemetry, and you can see the amount of activities that they were logging, alerting, and blocking went up too. I'm going to swing back to the simulations real quick and talk about how we set thresholds for these things. So every simulation that we put in the portal for our customers to use has this threshold setting stage that customers can go into. And we've included for all of them, like our guess of what would be sort of the minimum level necessary to say that you beat the simulation, right? Like the important objective of like encrypting data, getting off the network, and for this, in this case, that was, if you can obtain this level, then you've gotten like success against this thing, right? Because we recognize not everybody's going to want to log everything. Some customers are happy to run with our defaults. Some are like, those guys are idiots. I'm definitely going to do my own, so they're welcome to clear it out and run whatever they'd like here. Sometimes they'll clear it out and they'll start looking at this and like, you know what, that's probably not a bad idea. Maybe I'll just start with what they had, and we'll see if we need to make any changes from there. So we kicked off a campaign a few minutes ago. So you can see this thing our agent has pulled it down. It's been running. It's monitoring that this activity is still occurring. If we go back to our campaigns page, we'll see that it's running. So as soon as that agent reports back that that process is complete, we'll process those results and we'll populate them in here. We've done this with a few other different reports I'll show you real quick. So we have several campaigns that are built around the endpoint activity of the UNC 2452 group, which is the group that's sort of thought to be behind the SolarWinds activity. So this again is one of our simulations. You'll notice in this case, we actually inserted a delay in some of the activity, with the idea being that we would kind of like park some of the other events later to see if we could kind of use that as a way to trick the SOC team, like if they narrowed their scope too small. Now, again, these have all been scored, so you can see the full results. When we run these, like I said, we publish the full details, like you can see in the Scythe campaign, of exactly the command that we ran and then the output that resulted from that test. I see that we're coming up to almost 23 minutes. I'll show you one last thing that we started doing. Since we were dropping our endpoint agent anyways for folks, it occurred to us that we probably had a really good opportunity to give them some really good, like, what's the status of your endpoint here? So this is optional, but once you've installed the agent, you can opt for like the full host assessment. And we go and we run a number of checks that are very similar to like seatbelt or some of the other, like, you're on the box and you want to know from a pen test or red team perspective, like what are different ways to do privilege escalation or persistence or credential access. Some of these items will score, like if they're using an anti-malware system that borrows the or that leverages the AMC interface. Some of them we don't. Some of the things we put on here, because customers were asking us, we'd be talking about things like living off the land, and they would be like, well, what systems or what files specifically should I be worried about? And so here we've cataloged like literally all of them for them so they can see what this is. Some of this is helpful so they kind of know like what was the baseline local users. So if we add a local user and they want to know like what was the baseline, they can go back and see that. I have one last thing I'll show you on the reports that we do. And I'll just pull up one of these reports here. So we are big fans of the PlexTrack team. So Dan, who's coming up next. We also sync our results out of Blindspot into our PlexTrack instance. So today we put these in as vulnerability findings, but we're actually getting ready. We'll be releasing some ability to use their runbooks integration if you're familiar with that. And these have the exact same sort of like capabilities that we saw earlier. So you can give folks access to this. They can see the full details of everything if you don't want to give them access to the Blindspot portal. It also lets you run like a long form report. So if you're familiar with that. So I think I'm right up at 25 minutes.
Yes, that was awesome. And a good preview to what Dan is going to be talking about, showing some of the run books and the integrations there. But amazing stuff. Definitely folks on Twitter and on Discord. We're loving the visualizations. And a question that you kind of talked about, because OnDefend is a company that does consulting. You have a variety of different clients, right? Yeah. The question is, do you have to manually select the detection and the blue team outcome? Yeah. And why? And then let's talk a little bit about how this could be automated.
Yeah, totally. So the first iteration of Blindspot, for sure, you had to manually score it, except for the blocks we knew. But we've actually just recently joined, like, for example, we're technology partners with Palo Alto for their XOR product. So we're building some integrations there. We've already integrated with Elastic. So like this machine that I was doing the demos on uses the Elastic agents and the Elastic security agent, which used to be Endgame, all that stuff. So we can already pull that automatically. So if you are in a position where you have a tool you want us to integrate with, that's great. And one of the new versions that we'll release soon will let you take like a log file from a CrowdStrike, for example, upload it, we'll parse it and match it for you.
Nice. Yeah, no, and that's definitely an interesting one, right? At Scythe, we have customers that have all different stats.
All kinds, yeah.
So yeah. That's why we send that's why we have the API, which you use. That's how XOR implementation and Splunk Phantom also work, that they use the API, launch the campaign, and then through Scythe, you can send the attack logs back, which you did as well. But then the correlation has to happen on their end, right? On their Splunk instance or their Elk and whatnot. And I know as a consultant, right, no two companies have that same stack, and that's why the automated part is harder. But I think we're getting there, right? We figured out how to automate the attack. I love the quote that you said of, the quicker we get the automation and the adversary behaviors emulated in the target environment, the more time we can spend on detection engineering and on that manual portion. So that was fantastic. Really appreciate the partnership with you, Ben. Your great talk.
Thanks.
The other question on Blindspot was like, where can I get this? Is this up on GitHub or something?
So it's not open source. It is available. It's something that we use as a consulting tool. But if you're interested, I mean, our goal is to make this really widely available. So if you already have some Scythe instances and you want to automate some of that with this, totally plug and play. And if would you like for us to help you kind of curate some of the simulations? Totally doable too.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Ben. Really appreciate it.